Real. So thanks for that. Thanks for having me and thanks for coming. As Beck said, I'm Emma. I'm Red Squirrel Officer for the Lancashire Wildlife Trust. So today I'm going to talk to you about our work that we're doing, mostly in Sefton. We work North Merseyside and West Lancashire. So I'll start with a little bit about our squirrels to start off with. So red squirrels are our only native species of squirrel, and they can live in all types of woodland. It's a common misconception that red squirrels can only live in conifer habitats, but their prime habitats where populations can reach the highest densities are in mixed or broadleaf woodlands. They primarily feed on nuts and seeds, but will supplement their diet with fruit, fungi, insects, and plant shoots when their preferred food is less readily available. They're active all year, they do not hibernate, and a squirrel will build and live in a nest called a dray, which you can see on the left-hand side there at the bottom. This is a ball of twigs. Inside that, it'll be lined with moss, leaves, and grass, and it's usually located in the fork of a branch against the tree trunk. The breeding season starts with mating chases in January, and the first litters will be born in March. So we've just seen our first lot of kits this year. Females can produce another litter in July and August if the conditions are right and she can gain sufficient food. So the red squirrel is a species and major UK conservation concern, unfortunately. In 2020, the Mammal Society released an official red list for British mammals. This highlighted the species that were most at risk, and the red squirrel from this is classified as endangered, and it's one of 19 species considered at risk of extinction in Britain. There is an estimated 140,000 in the UK, but the majority of these are within Scotland, and there's only thought to be an estimated 15,000 in England. And without conservation management, it's predicted that the red squirrel would go extinct in England within 10 years. So this is something that we could see, this is a species we could see go extinct in our lifetime. And red squirrels and their resting places receive full protection in the UK under the Wildlife and Countryside Act. So reds were once widespread throughout UK woodlands, but have disappeared from large parts of their natural range during the last century and is now absent from most of England. Predators, including domestic cats and dogs, road traffic collisions, habitat loss and fragmentation, all pose threats to the red squirrel. But it's the introduction of the grey squirrel from North America to the UK in 1876, which is the main cause behind the sharp decline. So grey squirrels were introduced as an ornamental species to populate the grounds of stately homes. So people traveling over to North America saw them there, thought, yeah, I'd quite like them in my garden, brought them over for themselves here, brought them over to gift to people as well. And around 30 separate introductions occurred until the damage caused by greys was recognised, and it was made illegal to release a grey squirrel in 1937. So even though they didn't have the numbers we have now, even then they could recognise the impact they were having on our native wildlife. Studies have found that multiple translocations were a key driver for the grey success across the UK. So we used to think that because the grey squirrels are so adaptable, that enabled them to spread. But as well as those introductions and greys naturally spreading themselves, greys were taken by humans from thriving populations and moved to other areas. And this is what enabled greys to rapidly spread and colonise most of mainland England, which of course has had a negative impact on our reds. So these maps are red and grey squirrel distributions from 1945 to 2010. And you can just see that dramatic change in the distributions and how many areas we lost our reds from, and just that spread of greys across the UK. So what's the issue with greys? Well, grey squirrels are an invasive species and are listed by the IUCN as one of the 100 worst global invasive species. An invasive species is a non-native species which has a negative impact on the environment. The greys are invasive in the UK because they have a negative impact on our woodlands and our native red squirrel. So one of the issues that the greys cause is our reds is through competition. Grey squirrels competitively exclude reds, so they outcompete reds for food and resources. They now massively outnumber reds in the UK with an estimated 2.5 million compared to the 140,000 reds. So it's an intense amount of competition with that many. Greys can tolerate living in much denser populations than red squirrels, with greys achieving up to 15 individuals per hectare and reds only up to 2 to 3 in prime habitats. Greys are roughly twice as heavy as reds and therefore have a higher daily food requirement. Acorns are a valuable food source, which are used by both reds and greys, but greys are more efficient at digesting unripe acorns than reds are, and they can decimate crops before they ripen and become a viable food source for reds. And of course, a lack of food can negatively impact a red's breeding condition for the following spring. So greys are going into the breeding season in a better condition than reds can be. Greys will also raid the stores of seeds that reds have buried and rely on when food is scarce. So as they have that higher daily food requirement, live in higher densities and can eat food before it comes available to reds, greys are just able to completely monopolize food sources, and reds really struggle when there are greys in the environment. The effects of competition on reds result in a reduced fitness, reduced fecundity, which means that they're less likely to breed twice in a year. So they've got a lower breeding condition, and reduced body growth in juveniles. So even at moderate grey squirrel densities, reds are just unable to avoid competition. Grey squirrels tend to rely on trees with larger seeds that have high calorific values, such as oaks, whereas red squirrels can feed on smaller seeds with lower calorific values, such as the seeds of coniferous trees like pines. And this is the reason that most of our UK squirrel populations are restricted to coniferous woodlands, because greys have struggled to get a foothold in here. And so it's not the prime habitat for reds, but it's just an area in which they can survive. But it's not just competition, unfortunately. The most significant threat associated with greys is the spread and transmission of the squirrel pox virus. Greys act as a reservoir for squirrel pox. They're not affected by it, but they can be host to high concentrations of the virus, which they can then transmit to reds. And studies have found that up to 100% of greys in a population can carry squirrel pox. So it will vary in a population, but it can be that extreme. The symptoms in red include lesions, ulcers, and scabs around the face, feet, and genitalia. And infected individuals will die within 2 weeks, often starving to death as they're unable to feed themselves. It's a really, really grim disease. It's kind of like myxomatosis in rabbits, is kind of that grim where they just can't do anything for themselves towards the end. In the presence of squirrel pox, research has found that greys can replace reds up to 25 times faster than through competition alone. So it gives them a serious advantage over reds. Squirrel pox outbreaks in red squirrels do not occur in areas that grey squirrels have not yet reached. For example, in northern Scotland, outbreaks are linked to grey squirrels coming into red squirrel areas, but then red to red transmission can then occur after this. So where reds are just by themselves, it's not an issue, but it takes a red coming in and introducing it to the population, and then it can go between reds. The virus is found in bodily fluids, but it's fairly resilient, so it can survive outside a host for relatively long times, especially in warm environments. This summer, it's an extra issue where it can survive for a long time. Transmission vectors include physical contact, contaminated objects and areas. So for example, feeders, if people are feeding their squirrels, these are an issue for contamination, and share parasites. So squirrels, both reds and greys, use drays, and although they won't use them at the same time, they will use the same ones. So if a grey with squirrel pox uses one, it could contaminate the drain as well. If it leaves behind parasites such as fleas, this is another way that they can pass the infection. So we would advise members of the public to regularly clean their feeders and to reduce the risk of spreading disease. And in an outbreak, we ask them to remove them completely to reduce that risk. So greys are a significant threat to red squirrels in the UK, and there's a real need for conservation management to protect the remaining red populations. So what are we doing in the north? Well, in 2005, 17 large conifer forests in northern England were designated to help provide a focus for red squirrel conservation. So this is a map of their locations. The darker green is the Red Squirrel Reserve. So these are the conifer forests. And each reserve is surrounded by a 5-kilometre buffer zone. The conservation strategy focuses on protecting reds in these strongholds by controlling grey squirrels in these buffer zones. So the aim is to prevent greys from reaching these reserves. Formby, we're all the way down here. the most southerly reserve, and it's one of the only remaining urban areas in England where red squirrels can be found, so we're quite unique in that way. So this is a map of our stronghold. The areas in green are our woodlands, and we have 142 woodlands. But as you can see, they're quite fragmented, and as a varied landscape, it comes with a number of management considerations. So our reserve is over here in Formby, with the pine woods of Formby and Ainsdale. The woodlands themselves have about over 40 different ownerships, so we need to work with a variety of landowners, many of which are using their lands for different things. But as it's an urban environment, we also need to work with local communities. So our reserve here, this is the town of Formby. So of course we need these communities on board if we're able to do it effectively. So this is a map of the generalised distribution of red and grey squirrels within the stronghold. As you can see, there's no physical barrier between reds and greys, and this large orange area here is where both species are present. Plus the red squirrel reserve itself, highlighted in red, is also surrounded by greys on all sides. So of course, with the two species sharing the same areas, there's the risk of squirrel pox, and as well there's that competition. Excuse me. So over the last 13 years, unfortunately, we've had 2 squirrel pox outbreaks. 2008 was our worst, where we saw an 80% decline in the population. And in 2019, that was our most recent, and we saw a 50% decline in the population there. So the population's at real risk and in need of conservation management, and this is where the Red Squirrel Project comes in. So we cover the Merseyside and Lancashire Red Squirrel Project. It is our aim that red squirrels will once again become a common sight throughout North Merseyside, West Lancashire and beyond. We work with landowners, local communities, volunteers and our local Red Alert group. We have the longest running red squirrel monitoring programme in the UK. We coordinate grey squirrel control in the area and run an urban trap loan scheme to work with local residents to remove grey squirrels from gardens. So we've been able to track the Formby population through the squirrel pox outbreaks for our monitoring programme, and that's been in place since 2002. Staff and volunteers conduct visual transects, use hair tubes and trail cameras to assess red and grey squirrel numbers and presence in woodlands throughout the stronghold. So we then combine this with public ranger and volunteer sightings, which we collect throughout the year. Monitoring takes place twice a year in spring and autumn, and we will use a population index. So we're always comparing our population to what it was in 2002. So we're then able to monitor how the population has changed since then. So we basically take 2002 and take that as a baseline and then compare it to that. We're also, because we're doing it twice a year in spring and autumn, we're then able to monitor over winter survival and breeding success. So this is what we can do with the data from our monitoring programs. So this is from our autumn 2020 report, and you can see the population from 2002 to 2020. So you can see in 2008 where we had that quite sharp decline in our population due to squirrel pox, and again in 2019 where we had another crash to squirrel pox. But thankfully in our autumn 2020 monitoring, we have seen an increase in the reds in the reserve, so it does look like they're recovering from that. And we saw an increase in the average number of reds seen on the transects in autumn, increasing from 47% to 75% of the population index in 2020, so that was good to see. Last year as well, we only had 7 reported cases of possible squirrel pox, and none of these were confirmed. So that was a relief. Our spring monitoring went ahead this year, and that's now complete and the report's been put together. So we'll be able to see if the population is still recovering, which hopefully it will be. So throughout the year, we encourage the public to report their red and grey squirrel sightings within the stronghold to us. We use this monitor to map the populations throughout the year, and it contributes to our monitoring reports. The public help us to detect and monitor disease outbreaks, also by reporting any sick or dead red squirrels that they see to us. We will go out and collect reds if we suspect disease, and we can send samples off and have them analysed to see what we're dealing with. As parts of the stronghold are an urban environment, it's really important we have data for these areas to effectively monitor reds and greys, but gardens are largely under-recorded. I think people can get quite used to seeing reds and don't think to report them. So if they've had reds visiting their gardens for years, they might not think to let us know. But of course, if we don't have the data, we don't know. I'm always reminding people that they're very lucky to have reds in their garden. So this is something that we're trying to push this year. And to tackle it, we ran a red squirrel garden survey, which aimed to increase the data we have from gardens. It was inspired by the Big Garden Birdwatch, and we asked members of the public to watch their garden for 1 hour and record the squirrels that they saw. And we had 36 households take part this year, which was great. And we're going to run it again in autumn, hopefully get a bit more participation. And not only was it a great way of increasing the data we have for gardens, but also a way of engaging the public with our monitoring programme, as not everyone knows that it takes place. This year, we've also started utilising our social media channels more. We've been producing maps to share through them. And that's been a great way of raising awareness of our monitoring programme and has encouraged more people to submit from areas we don't usually receive many sightings for. So this is a map of our sightings from January to the end of March this year. So that went out on Facebook and it did really, really well and actually raised so much awareness that we managed to double the amount of sightings that we had. As you can see, most of our reports of reds come from Formby, but this is the area where we mostly do see them. But we would like to be able to get more data for more areas as well. And as you can see, not many people report greys, I think mainly because they don't know that we accept grey sightings and that we're interested in them. But as well, some people don't always want to report them. So that's something that we want to increase as well. So these are the maps that are produced for our autumn 2020 report using sightings from the public, volunteers and staff. So on the left, you've got red sightings and on the right, you've got the greys. As you can see, there are many areas of overlap and greys have actually been sighted around and within the reserve. So of course, with this comes the risk of squirrel pox. It can only take one grey to introduce it. So of course, any greys around there are cause for concern. I think these maps really emphasise the importance of monitoring grey and red populations throughout the year. Our autumn and spring monitoring give us an important overall view of the populations, but our public sightings data enables us to react in real time to the risks of greys entering the reserve. So we use sightings to inform us where we need to focus grey control. And if greys are sighted in gardens, members of the public will be sent information about our trap balloon scheme. So the public will report if they found any dead or sick red squirrels, which helps us to monitor any disease outbreaks. Any bodies collected which we suspect may have pox, we take a sample and send for testing for confirmation. Disease outbreaks are difficult to detect in more remote areas or areas with low density of reds where people are less likely to see them. And during a disease outbreak, we need to find the carcasses to be able to confirm what disease we are dealing with so we can then deal with it accordingly. If it's infectious, such as pox, any carcasses remaining in the environment can continue to be a source of infection. So if we can find them and remove them, we can prevent them from spreading infection further. In the past, volunteers and staff have put in long hours searching for dead red squirrels, but with little success. But we're now very lucky to have Max on board to help us to find sick and dead red squirrels. So Max is a conservation dog. He is trained to search for and locate sick and dead red squirrels. Max will search an area and then he will signal he's found a red squirrel by sitting down. So it's a passive display. He's not out there chasing squirrels. Max has saved us hundreds of man hours and improved our efficiency at finding dead and sick squirrels. Max is able to cover large areas over rough and inaccessible terrain, which staff and volunteers would be unable to search effectively. He absolutely loves the job and he gets it done way quicker than we ever could. And during the last pox outbreak, Max confirmed that the outbreak was still ongoing, even after the public reports to us had ceased. So whereas before we may have think, oh, like it started to calm down, we're not getting it anymore, maybe the outbreaks ended. He went out, searched an area and found another sick squirrel. So we knew that we needed to stay vigilant. We hope that our red squirrel populations stay healthy, but if there's another pox outbreak, we now have Max to help us to detect it quicker and help us manage it more efficiently. So if a member of public gets in touch and says, I think I saw a squirrel with pox in this area, Max can go out with his owner, Rachel, and they can search an area just to see if there's anything we need to be concerned about there. So he's a real help. So we, of course, want to avoid any outbreaks in the first place. So we coordinate grey squirrel control throughout the woodlands of the stronghold. The main method of control is trapping. The aim of grey control is to reduce detrimental effects of competition and to reduce the risk of further outbreaks of squirrel pox. The monitoring we run, as I mentioned before, enables us to identify priority areas. So if there's areas where we're seeing really high density of greys, or if there are areas where we think greys are dispersing from them into the reserve, we can identify these as areas where we need to go to control. The urban environment isn't as easy to manage as the landscape is made up of individual gardens, but we have the trap loan scheme that we run that provides grey control in these areas. So if members of public report a grey in their garden, they'll be sent the information about the trap loan scheme. So before on those maps, any of those areas, anytime someone reports a grey to us, we'll let them know the information about our trap loan scheme. If they wish to participate, a volunteer will provide them with a trap, show them how to set it, monitor it. Once they've trapped a grey, a volunteer will come and collect it for them. The scheme is very successful, especially in areas where members of the public usually only see reds in their garden, so such as Formby. Local residents are very keen to protect their reds and understand that greys must be controlled. So these are people who have seen the squirrel pox outbreaks before. They may have been there for the past 2. So they've seen their reds disappear. They may have seen sick red squirrels. So they really understand that grey control, unfortunately, is an essential thing that needs to happen. So the trap loan scheme is a really useful tool for grey control in these areas. So overall, the introduction of invasive non-native species is the second biggest threat to global biodiversity after habitat loss. But once they've established, like the grey squirrels have in the UK, they can be incredibly difficult to control. And as an invasive species, there's need for grey squirrels to be controlled across the UK to prevent the negative impacts they have on our woodlands, as well as on our reds. And there's currently research ongoing to try and find an effective solution and a less labour-intensive method than trapping. So grey squirrels cause damage to trees through bark stripping. The damage leaves them at risk of fungal infections, can impact its functioning, and can even kill the tree. It's estimated that grey squirrel damage to trees in England and Wales costs 37 million a year in lost timber value, reduced carbon capture, which of course in the times when we're trying to control climate change is really important, damage mitigation, and to replace dead trees. Woodland creation is at the top of the forestry policy agenda and was mentioned in the environmental bill yesterday, but the damage by grey squirrels is a threat to the health and creation of these new woodlands. So there's a want and need for squirrels to be effectively controlled in the forestry sector, but also calls for non-lethal methods from the public. Research funded by the UK Squirrel Accord is currently ongoing into a grey squirrel fertility control. So this would provide a non-lethal control for populations and support the current eradication efforts. The study aims to produce an oral immunocontraceptive that can be delivered in feeders which only greys can access, so it's going to be grey specific. The Animal and Plant Health Agency is currently trying different methods. They're the ones doing the research into this. And studies suggest that fertility control applied in addition with culling is the most effective approach to reducing grey squirrel populations. So it's not going to be a completely non-lethal solution, but there's hope that the fertility control will be able to halt the population growth. And due to conservation efforts and reintroductions, the pine marten is making a comeback in the UK, and with it, there's hope that the species can boost the red squirrel populations by controlling greys. So pine martens are a natural squirrel predator, and in areas where pine martens have recovered, there have been subsequent declines in grey squirrel populations, allowing the reds to recover. So pine martens will predate both species, but studies have found that they tend to predate more grey than red, but this is probably due to the availability of grey squirrels as they live at higher densities. And it's also thought that as reds evolve with a predation threat, they know to avoid pine martens, but greys as an introduced species, they're a bit naive to them and don't know that they need to avoid them. However, research is ongoing and pine martens have been found to avoid urban areas. So unfortunately, this won't be applicable for us in Formby, but if greys can be effectively controlled, it not only benefits our reds, but it also benefits our woodlands. So on to another part of our work, we're also involved in rescuing orphaned red squirrel kits. So pregnancy will last 5 to 6 weeks, after which 3 to 4 kittens are born. They're born blind and hairless and are entirely dependent on mom until they're weaned, which is usually by 10 weeks. So of course, if anything happens to mom in this time, they won't be able to survive without her. At around 7 weeks, they start to venture out of the nest and explore with mom. And of course, with this comes the risk of injury or separation. So if the public report to us that they've seen an orphan, if intervention is needed, we will go and collect them and we will hand rear them. So this little one is Ainsley Dale, who was rescued in 2019. He was found at Ainsdale National Nature Reserve on the ground. He was freezing cold and still had his eyes closed. He was only about 3 weeks old. So at that age, he needed to be with mom and he needed to still be in the dray. So he was hand reared and successfully released back to Ainsdale a little bit later in the year. So all the kits we rescue are rescued with the aim to return them to the wild as soon as they are ready. So our volunteers and staff have built release pens, so our hand-reared juveniles can be soft released. So this just provides them with some time to adjust and we can monitor them to be sure they're okay before being released to the wild. So when they're ready, the hatch on top, which you can see in this top photo, is open so they can come and go as they please. We continue to monitor them through this and they will eventually move out. So this spring we had 2 orphans, which were named Nutella and Nutkin. And our volunteers were going in, they were checking the food, checking the water. The hatch has been open for a couple of weeks now. We started to realise they weren't coming back as much. So we wondered if now was the time to close the hatch for them. So we've checked the cameras again and they were still coming back. So this lower photo here was from last week. So they're coming back, but they're not sleeping there. They're just literally coming back for food and off they go. So they've definitely moved out from home. They're just using the benefits. So we will start, we've put feeders on the outside of here anyway, because we feed the squirrels in the area. So we're just going to start moving the food out. So they'll eventually stop popping back and we'll get it ready for the, maybe if we get any next ones in the next breeding season. So if you like to keep in touch with us and keep track of what we do, we're on Facebook, the Merseyside and Lancashire Red Squirrel Project. We've also got a group in there where locals will share photos of reds in their garden, which is quite nice. If you like a daily photo of reds to see, quite cute. And we're also on Instagram as well as Lancs_Red Squirrels, and we share a lot of our news and photos on there as well. So thank you for coming. Great to take any questions that you've got. I've also put my email address on there. We do take, often if you're a student, for example, you've got research projects coming up. If there's anything you'd like to do in the area, you can always get in touch, let us know. If you'd like to volunteer, obviously now everything's we've got lots of opportunities for things remotely. So even if you're not in the area, but you want to get involved, there's opportunity for that. Of course, if you're local as well, we've got lots of opportunities. So just get in touch if there's anything you'd like to do with us.
Perfect. Thank you, Emma. So does anyone have any questions? If you would like to unmute yourself, you are welcome to come and ask them. I can see, Rachel, you've asked one in the chat, but if you'd like to ask it in person, you are more than welcome to unmute and ask that. No, okay, so we've got a question. So do red squirrels strip bark to some degree, or is it just the greys which do that?
Yeah, so reds will do it to some degree, it has been seen, but not to the extent that greys will. So reds do not have the same kind of jaw strength, RT strength that greys do. So greys can be much more aggressive as well. Woodlands can be home to much higher densities of greys than reds can. So the damage done by greys is much more extreme than what you'd see with reds.
Cool. Does anyone else have any questions? If you don't feel like asking them in person, you can put them in the chat. Otherwise, if you would like to virtually raise your hand or mute yourself, then you can ask Emma a question.
I was going to say, I have a question, if no one else is going to be brave. I was really interested about the dog that you obviously is trained to
Everyone always is.
Yeah, it's like amazing. I've never heard of such a thing. And I just wondered how long it took to train him to do that, or like, and how much working time do you get out of a dog like that? Do you know?
So he was originally trained as a pyrotechnic detecting dog. He used to work at like football matches, but he was retired from that after someone threw a firework at him and he became absolutely terrified. So he was kind of retrained in this, but it's kind of, there's kind of more of a need of it now with ecological surveys, and we've started to realize that dogs can detect species as well. So it's kind of something that's becoming quite, well, it's more popular at the moment to have dogs involved in things like this. But I think he was about 2 years old when he came to us. But he's incredibly smart. He took it up very quick. But yeah, they'll do like intensive training courses. The Lancashire Wildlife Trust has been a host to a few recently. But yeah, it's something that's up and coming at the moment, which is quite exciting to see. They do a lot, they'll be doing surveys. When I first saw it, it was about surveys at turbine fields and seeing how the dogs there go and collect any like carcasses of birds and bats. So they're doing surveys to see the impact that wind turbines have on the environment there. So it's quite cool to see what you can do with them. But of course, they're so much quicker than us. So it makes sense to be able to use them. But yeah, he's a great help and he's absolutely amazing. We had him, he came out with us to one of the sites a couple of months ago now, and I've got to see him working, and the way he absolutely loves it because he gets his reward at the end, which is just a ball, and he's just driven by that. Like he's, as soon as he sees it, he's so excited and he knows what to do. So it's quite amazing to see how quick he can work.
I love that it was already really interesting, and then he was also a pyrotechnic dog, like on the fly, and that was just even cooler. We've got some more questions though. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Jenny, did you want to pop up off of mute and appear into the chat, or did you want us to field it? Go on. Yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
And indeed.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, from your distribution maps, it looked like there was more patchy a decline in Scotland where the greys hadn't reached, and I was just wondering if that's, do you know if that's any particular reason, or is it just the lack of recording in the areas? Because in the earlier map in the 1940s, it seemed like it was wider distribution of the reds in Scotland as well. I don't know if that's your patch or if you can comment.
Oh yes, up at the top. So yeah, there has been decline. It could be potentially from the habitat loss and the fragmentation.
Yeah.
That's me guessing from there, as I'm not sure from Scotland's point of view what it is. But yeah, my best guess would be habitat use up there.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Enjoyed the talk really very much.
We've got a question in the chat again from a different Jenny. Jenny, would you like to unmute, or would you like us just to read that out for you?
I'm happy for you guys just to cover it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
So Jenny would just like to know if, firstly, how long do red squirrels live for? And then secondly, are they more shy than the grey squirrels?
So they will live up to an average of 6 years in the wild. And I would say, although Formby, we do have them in the urban environment, so people have them in their gardens. We have got videos of them being quite cheeky and not absolutely bothered. They know where their food comes from, and they're more than keen to get it. But we are finding in areas, and especially during lockdown, where more people are going outdoors, the Formby Reserve, on our monitoring, we used to see, well, we did see red squirrels regularly, but now we're finding that our volunteers are seeing them less and less, and they think it's linked to the amount of people that they're seeing outdoors. So when lockdown happened and suddenly all people could do is go outside, the local areas suddenly increased with the amount of people going through them. So our volunteers are seeing that as they're seeing more people, they're seeing less red squirrels. Formby would have got busier, whereas Ainsdale is usually quieter and has stayed the same, and we're seeing more reds there. So a lot of our volunteers are thinking these busier areas we're seeing less reds, and we're thinking that's possibly because they have been disturbed and they're quite affected by these raised activity levels. So I guess in those aspects they are shyer, but as well studies have found that it depends from individual to individual. Some red squirrels are shy, whereas some aren't. So yeah, there is the possibility for them being shy. I think overall the ones in our woodlands definitely prefer a quieter space.
Thank you, that's great.
I did have a question as well. From your one that you did in autumn of 2020, do you think any of those results were impacted by us being in a lockdown, by us being, you know, more readily around? Do you think that could have impacted the number of reds that were seen from a public point of view?
From the public point of view, I think there are more people out and about. I think we've probably got a few more. I say probably this year now we're reaching more people. Hopefully we're going to see more. But the red from our transects, that reserve one, that is the reserve monitoring, sorry, so from our graphs, that is just from the visual transects that our volunteers do. So in them, I would say probably with those transects, we're seeing less squirrels in some areas, so we're more effective the other way, but thankfully we're seeing more in other areas, so it's on the up.
Great. So does anyone have any further questions before we let you all head off with the rest of your day? No? Okay, no problem. Well, as I said, you will be sent a feedback email. Hopefully that should already be through to you. So if you could fill in some feedback of how you found the talk, that would be really helpful for us. It does help us obviously continue with these. And you will also be sent a follow-up email, which is hopefully coming to you on Friday, just with some more links of the project. But if you would like to all unmute or say thank you to Emma, and then you are free to leave.